Hello and welcome. My name is Rituparna, and you are listening to the Storied Way Perspective, a podcast that brings to you the power of stories in our world, in our lives, and how it all interconnects with what we do in the world today. I began my storytelling journey as a journalist, and if you've been following the podcast, you may have picked up some threads of my life before. When I transitioned to oral storytelling, my first step was into the world of children. In the past decade, from being a children's storyteller to a teacher trainer, designing story based curricula, to pursuing the power of stories in the classroom, to designing programs on story pedagogy, to now writing for children. The power of stories in childhood was my first brush to the world of storytelling. I followed a gleam in the dark and discovered a world of treasures. We've spoken about storytelling and children on the podcast so far, but this episode is a clear step up. My guest today is Dr. Swati Popat Vats, a name synonymous with early childhood education in India and beyond. She is the founder and president of the Early Childhood Association of India and the Association for Preparatory Education and Research. And she leads the Podar Education Network, which spans over 490 preschools and daycares across India, Nepal, UAE, and Qatar. Dr. Vats is a trailblazer who introduced the concept of education and approach to learning that centers a child's development, not just their syllabus. Her work has touched millions through books, teacher training, advocacy, and child safety and thought leadership on platforms like Kidzania's Think Tank. In our conversation, we will explore the deep relationship between storytelling and children and pedagogy, why stories aren't just fun for children but foundational to their emotional and cognitive growth. We talk about her influences, including education, visionaries like Gijubhai, Frobel, and Vygotsky, and how storytelling remains one of the most powerful tools we have in the early years. So, if you're a parent, an educator, or someone who believes that change begins with the youngest learners, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. Dr. Watts, welcome back to the Storied Way Perspective. When I started discussing about storytelling and how it is shaping our world about 3 years back, you were very kind to come on a panel discussion and share so passionately about education. I'd been following your work a little before that, and I had the courage to reach out to you and speak to you and say, let's please come and speak to us because we'll have educators and early childhood storytellers who want to perhaps will gain so much from your insight. In on this podcast, it gives me a one-on-one time with you. So thank you so much for taking out the time
Pleasure
to
is all
speak to
mine.
me. Great, great, great. So this is a question which I've been dying to ask you, which is that first story that you remember was being told to you as a child. Who was that storyteller in your life who sort of ignited and sparked your mind and your heart more than your mind, first your heart, with the power of stories?
So, usually people say dadi ki kahaniyan, but my dadi was not much of a storyteller. My mother was, and she used to tell us stories in Gujarati. So I'm so happy that you asked this question because it really brought back the memories, fast forward.
Yeah.
She used to tell us stories about, in Guju, it's called Chakko and Chakki. So, which means a male sparrow and a female sparrow. And she used to tell us stories about a crow and a sparrow. I mean, now as I grow up and become an educator, I used to tell my mom also years back when she's no more now. But I used to tell her, you all used to label all these birds, because in the story, the crow used to bring all rubbish for his parents, and the sparrow used to bring all good food and everything. So basically, the idea of this was to tell a child that you have to become like the sparrow and not the crow. But as you grow up, you and as an educator, you realize, oh my God, this was so much of labeling. But
Mm.
I loved the Chakko Chakki stories that she used to tell us and how hardworking the birds were. And it was at that age that through the story, I learned how to recognize a male sparrow from a female sparrow. So, the impact of these stories is so much that I'm so glad you asked this question.
Did you ever tell the same story in a classroom with children years
I
later?
have. I told the Chakka Chakki story because it was all about making a nest and how
Mm.
to identify from the black mark under the neck and all that. I don't know what was the source of these stories. So when I was working on researching on Gijubhai, I thought many of these stories were Gijubhai stories,
Hmm.
but we never, gave him the credit for
Credit.
these stories.
And they're part of the oral literature, I think, because
Yes,
even Gijubhai would have picked up stories which he would have heard
absolutely.
other than the ones he authored, to also bring that oral folklore in. I'm from Bengal, and we have Tuntuni's Pakhi
Okay.
story, which is again a bird, a tailor bird, and it's her story, and it's immensely popular in children's folklore in West Bengal.
Sadly, all these Gujarati stories are not so popular now, which is so sad.
No, of course, none of these oral stories are popular now,
It's so
because
sad.
we have all the international books, and perhaps this oral tradition of telling stories like your mother would tell is sort of somewhere dying. Don't blame the mother alone. Even the grandmothers don't know the stories anymore. So I think that itself is lost. A lot of literature has happened in resurrecting those stories, bringing those stories out, and documenting them. But I think the practice of keeping a oral literature alive has also, the with times, it's sort of changed, it's evolved.
When in retrospect, when I think about it, so many of my values stemmed from just that simple story that my mom used to tell me. Whether it's
Mhm.
my connect with nature or that bond of attachment that you have, it all stems from that one little story time. And it wasn't very. I remember telling these stories and making up more for my nephew
Mm.
because I told him millions of stories. I think we must have made up. So I was quite impressed by the oral storytelling tradition, and I never used storybooks for him.
Yeah.
I always used to tell him oral stories.
Right. No, even my grandmother didn't. And the first time I bought one of the books published, I don't read in my mother tongue. I can read translations, of course. So the first time I bought a book based on the stories that my grandmother or my parents told me when I was a little girl was an English translation, and was when I became a storyteller, because that's the first question that even I went like, do I remember the stories which I heard as a child, and which were those, and let me find those in some form or the other. So that's me going back. Very interestingly, you mentioned something that your mother told you a story. Perhaps she was trying to teach you the values of be the crow, not
Yes,
not the other one. Was it a mina? What was sparrow? Sparrow. So not be the sparrow and not the crow, and all kinds
yeah.
of things. And then you mentioned something about telling it in your classroom, or rather before that, as a child, you, for your love for nature, for your love for the outdoor, or could be to observe your surroundings more carefully. And the third thing you mentioned, when you told the story to a classroom, it became about nests, it became about birds, how to differentiate. So somewhere the story and its meaning and its, let's say, significance changes from the original teller to the listener turning into a storyteller, making it about something else. Can you talk a little bit about that? How does the
I
story
think
change?
that is what appeals to us. And I think that's what we have not been able to put our finger on. That why the oral storytelling tradition needs to be kept alive
Hmm.
is because it brings a part of the storyteller into the story and it hands it over to the next storyteller. So each one is actually adding to the story their own perspective, their own likes and dislikes, and shaping the story. So it's such a live story that it gets shaped from storyteller to storyteller. And I think that is what binds us to these traditional folklores,
Yeah.
because there is something of someone in that story. I think what my mother was trying to do was to tell me to be clean, because my mother was a complete OCD, and I think what she was trying to tell me through the story is that be clean like the sparrow and don't be dirty. But then when you grow up and you realize that it's the crow that keeps us all clean, and so yeah. So now if I were to tell this story to somebody, I would not bring in that the crow was bad or the sparrow was bad. So see, I would
Yeah.
reshape the story based on
Reshape it.
my values.
Yes, and also your perception and understanding. Maybe that objective of telling that story from a mother's point of view was very straightforward, and which is normal. A lot of elders tend to do that. I will tell a story, and my child will learn about being
Exactly.
clean, and but the child is listening something else, is picking up something else.
Absolutely, I did learn. I always look up to a sparrow and think about cleanliness.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand where her mindset came from
Mm-hmm.
about a crow, because in the olden days we used to think dark means everything
Right.
dirty.
Dirty. Yes.
So that's how they were brought up, that's how they were shaped. But now
Right.
as we evolve, I think that's how you remove some of these things from these stories, these stigmas or these labeling, and you reshape the story. So the story is not bad. It's what you take from the story or how you shape the story.
And also allow the child to take away something else. You were trying to talk about something within the story the child has chosen
Yeah,
deliberately,
yeah,
using his or her intelligence to sort of say that
absolutely.
I don't know about that, but I like this in the story, so I'm going to
Yeah,
pursue that.
yeah,
How do you know which is a male bird and a female bird? I don't know. I don't care about whether they're clean or dirty. Right now, I want to know, how do you know that? So I think that itself is a great curiosity to forward,
exactly.
allow the child the freedom. So the great introduction to talk about the importance and significance of storytelling as a pedagogy, as a tool, as a medium in the early years. So over to you. I mean, for anyone who's listening, I'm sure people have heard you many times over, but to the listeners of my podcast, what makes storytelling such a powerful tool in the early years?
So I think storytelling for me, because when I did my B.Ed and I had to give lessons in the ninth and 10th standard, I still use stories.
Hmm.
Because for me, it is very important that people want to listen to a story. When we hear somebody talking, our ears perk up because we want to know their story. So a human brain is geared to listen to stories, to listen to incidents, to listen and be part of something. We always want this sense of belonging, that I want to be part of this. And I think that's why stories appeal to us, because we connect with the characters, we connect with the language, we connect with some places that we may not have visited, and the characters in the story are visiting. So it kind of gives you another world in which you can live along with the characters. So it's not just one world of yours that you are living in. If you are following six or seven stories, you are part of seven different worlds. And I think that's why, as Indians, we love to watch movies. And nowadays, we love to watch all these
OTTs.
OTTs and all that, because it's now giving us a chance to be part of so many stories. So I think that's what we love. We love that sense of belonging. You become a part of that story. Somewhere or the other, your emotions align with one character. You feel good about something. You are able to vent out your anger through another character. So I think in every possible way, it kind of connects to your brain. And having studied brain development so much, and after when I studied Gijubhai and why he chose to tell stories in his classroom, I realized that everything that neuroscience is saying about the way children learn is achieved through a story. And it's
Absolutely.
so simple that I'm surprised why we stop telling stories at a certain age. And we tell children now it's time to start studying. Story is also another way of studying. Chemistry can be done through a story. It's the story of molecules. A biology can be done through a story. Why don't you make it interesting for me to listen to something,
Hmm.
rather than telling me a story stops somewhere and studying starts somewhere? That should not happen. So I feel and a lot of people don't relate to this. A lot of people believe stories, what stories, I mean,
Waste of time.
yeah, waste of time, fiction. But
Make
no,
believe.
I feel if history was taught to us through story, there's a word story in history.
Yes, of course.
So if history was taught to us through a story, real story, I'm not saying add fiction to it, but teach me about Rani Lakshmi Bai or Shivaji in a story format, and then see how fast I will connect to history. I will remember the facts and figures. History was taught to us so boringly. Remember when the person was born, remember when the person died, when the first war. It was all about dates. So you suddenly brought in maths into history. And I was a student who does not like maths. I was one of those students. I hated history because there was so much of maths involved in it, remembering this date and that
Numbers.
date and that date. And then I did my B.Ed in English and history, and now I'm writing a book on numeracy. So it made me understand that my education was all wrong because stories were missing. And
Hmm.
I would not want to do that to any student.
I think stories are such a vital tool. You just need to grow the potential or your definition or
Hmm.
application of what story does at every age group. This is my life's work, Dr. Vats. I've been working with schools for a little over a decade. And when I was first invited to teach storytelling at Delhi University, I walked in and asked them, so what's the curriculum? So they said, no, we don't have a curriculum. In fact, we have an outcome that we want, teachers to be able to do A, B, C, D. And then I saw that storytelling for language learning.
Mhm.
That's where the 90% of the focus was there. And there was nothing else beyond language learning. I said, but what beyond language? I mean, you can use story, and they're all elementary education teachers, which means they would teach from early years till grade 8.
Mhm.
This is the companion course in Delhi University called Bachelor of Elementary Education. And storytelling for their definition was just for language learning. You study Hindi or English, and that's it. I said, that's so restrictive. You've brought in a storyteller. Now let me try and expand the horizon or
Exactly.
the possibility of teaching
Yeah.
any subject. And therefore, the potential of a story in the early years, in the primary, in the middle. Because if you're going up till, let's say, even middle school or primary, let me sort of expand the possibility of that one story or multiple stories to create a learning outcome. And that's where my experiments with pedagogy really started, because while I was teaching, I was developing this methodology, which was completely new to, of course, my students. They had never been to any classrooms where any of this was done. So they were like, what are you doing teaching us? We don't know. It's like, and then, the inner child in every teacher comes out and says, and they're all children after all, because they've just to college, and they're like, okay, we've never studied like this. And I said, do you see the potential? And therefore, that's that first step into say that, yeah, we've never experienced it, but we're learning something new, and therefore it looks like a very interesting tool to work as a teacher. So
Absolutely.
that's where it started. But I see a lot of restriction. I agree with you that, why does stories become so boring, or rather stories are taken out and therefore lessons become boring. My son and I listened to this podcast called Empire. It's by Anita Anand and William Dalrymple, and it's a fascinating, historical stories, and we are so riveted. Stories can be made a lot of fun, and it grows. Going back to again the early years, you have spent, quite a considerable amount of time talking
38 years.
about, yes, 38 years talking about early childhood and how that is so vital in childhood development. Have you created something called Born Smart, the video
Yes,
based resource for parents? So
yes.
again, I will try to fit in storytelling there. How important is storytelling in the first 100 days of a child's, or 1,000 days of a child's life? Sorry.
So, when we talk about child development, there are 5 areas of development which you need to focus on in the first 3,000 days, and especially so in the first 1,000 days. The first one is, of course, communication and language. And then you have physical development, you have cognitive learning, language development, and socio emotional development. So, these are what are emerging when a child is growing. Now, when you look at a story, and especially a story between a mother and a child. I'm not talking about Alexa telling a story to a child. I'm talking about a mother, while she's feeding the child, is telling a story to a child. Think of the attachment that happens, think of the bonding that happens, think of the language flow which is happening, think of the physical development, because you are more closer when you are listening to a story. Have you noticed when you start telling a story to a child, they come up and they curl up next to you. There is no distance when you are telling a story. That's why I always tell teachers, when you're telling a story in the classroom, let the children sit the way they want to and as close to you as possible. There are some children who, the minute you'll open a storybook, will come very close to you, and your first instinct is to say dur beto,
Stay
and you,
away, step out.
yeah, you've killed it. So if you notice, all these aspects of development are being taken care of just through an aspect of storytelling. Think of the amount of emotional and social skills that we are teaching a child through a story. So I'm not saying only the mother. Every parent should be doing it. Every grandparent should be doing it, because one of the most important things that a child requires in the first 1,000 days is bonding. And if that bonding doesn't happen, it's going to influence the way I see the world, the way I connect to the world, and the way I trust the world. So if you read up on Erik Erikson, he has these 7 stages of human development, and trust versus mistrust is the first level. So that happens through bonding. So it's very, very important that when you use stories as that tool to bond with your child or with any child, you have actually given such a great strong foundation to this child. उसके ऊपर आप कुछ भी बनवा लो.
Hmm.
The foundation is strong. Whatever happens, the child has that bond to fall back on. That becomes that child's cushion, that child's mat on which to fall on. sorted for life. That's the importance of storytelling in the early years.
Also to feel safe,
One thousand.
when you are in the hands of
Yes,
an adult, to
yes,
feel safe, that this is my safe space. I can feel calm. I don't need to, I'm not triggered by anything which is upsetting me. And also to some extent understanding the world around oneself, that here is an adult, my parent, my teacher, my grandparent, or maybe even a storyteller, who is allowing me that space to slow down and ask a question, to slow
yes.
down and say something which could be out of the ordinary, but I'm not reprimanded for it. To do something while in the middle of a story, which is allowed. So creating that safe space is so significant. For
Another thing is that in a story, there is somebody who's talking to me.
Hmm.
That's something that many people have not looked at. Usually, you are either questioning a child or you are interrogating a child. You always ask a child a question or you interrogate, ye kiya ke nahi, ye kiya. You are never talking to a child. And in a story, it gives you that feeling of somebody is talking to me, somebody is paying attention to me. This person is right now focused only on telling me a story. So, that importance of self esteem also kind of builds in a child when a parent tells that story as a everyday routine to the child. So, I think so many aspects are gone ignored, and we just look at a story as that's it, a story.
through stories, I've got a peek into children and their lives and their families as well. There's a book called No David, one of
Oh yeah, I love that
David
book.
Sherrod's book. I love it. I think that it has immense potential in the classroom in the hands of a child. But most children go back to that butt naked picture of
Hmm.
David, which they love because they see a sense
Yes,
of freedom which they don't have. So most children want to go back to that picture and laugh and talk about it. But there's
yes.
this one child who wanted to go back to the picture where the vase is broken and the child is sitting in a corner with a tear trickling down. And he would point at that picture and he would say, at the moment he would say that, he would take 3 steps back. And he did that about 5, 6 times while all the kids were going back and forth on that book, and he just wanted to see that picture, or he only, it was only he who wanted to see that picture, and kept saying that. And his bodily reaction to me said that he has broken something and he has faced the repercussions of it. And another time we were doing a story where this one child just kept walking like this, and we had to walk in circles, hold hands and walk in circles, and she insisted on walking with her shoulder on her cheek, till I realized that, okay, she's limiting the movement and she's not allowing me to get close to her. So she didn't want to do the activity, but when she came in, that's how she wanted to walk. You just can imagine a little girl walking like that. Till I got again the kids to do something to move their hands, and I saw that, see, 5 finger marks on her cheek. Again, I'm talking about pre-nursery, nursery kids. Sometimes a story gives adults that sneak peek into what's happening with that child, because the child may not be able to articulate, say, express, and that's a wonderful opportunity for an adult to go in. Do you have an anecdote or something to share about a classroom where a story helped you reach a child, intervene, change the course of how the child was being dealt with?
So I use stories also with drawings. So when you talk, when a child does a drawing, you ask the child to tell us the story of his drawing, and that's where a lot comes out from the child. So we had this child in one of our schools, and he complained that the didi, which means the attendant of the classroom, had taken off his clothes, and she had taken off her clothes also, and she was hugging him. And it became a huge issue, and the parents came, and they, how these kind of issues become. And because it was a complaint, we had to remove her. And but I wasn't able to believe it, because she was a very older lady, and this was nowhere matching what we knew about her. She had been with us for around 8 years. And so then I said, let me make this child draw about the incident. So after 5 or 6 days, and this was a 4-year-old child, so we made the child draw, and I said, just draw whatever happens in school, whatever, whether it's happy. So he did about 8 drawings, and in one of the drawings, he showed himself with a lady sitting and playing toys. So I said, who's this? So she said, Didi, and he took the name of the Didi. So I said, how is she? And he said, she's very good. In his mother tongue, the child was talking, and saying that I like her very much and all that. So then I very probed again and I asked that, can you tell me anything that has happened with her? So he said, my mummy doesn't like her. So my mummy told me to say that she's done something bad to me. So I said, so that means she's not done it to you? So he started laughing and he said, no, it was a joke. And my mummy told me to say that. And that poor lady lost her job. And I said, if we had not done this activity with this child, uh, because throughout the activity, I was doing the drawing. I would do a drawing of myself so that he gets motivated to do of his. And then I would tell him about my drawing so that he would tell me about his drawings. It was this kind of it was, a kind of an interaction.
Yeah.
And that's when we realized that something as important as good touch or bad touch is not being taught to children through a story. And that's when I made my first video. It's made with Muppets, and it's a story of your body. That just like you feel cold and you feel hot and you do something about it. So I think that's where we realize that even the toughest of things can be taught through a story to young children, so that they focus more on the learnings and not on the danger or the get scared about it, etc. And this is what I tell teachers also, that when a child bites another child in the class, you can always tell a story about a teddy bear who bit a doll, because when they will listen to that story, they will identify with it. Instead of sitting and shouting to both the children that why did you bite each other, you whatever you change you want to bring, make it into a story. And in that story, you will be surprised at the intelligence of these children, who realize that this is being told about what I'm not supposed to do. And through that story format, they're able to get whatever you want. So don't preach. I always say, some of these stories teachers do, and they at the end say what is the moral of the story. I felt like, oh my God, you just destroyed a whole story. You don't tell or ask about the moral of the story, or what's the. Imagine you go for a Shah Rukh Khan movie, and at the end of the movie, Shah Rukh Khan says, "To kya seekhe movie se?" It's as bad as that. So I think the worst things which are required can be taught through stories, can be inspired through stories. So I think if we just be a little more alert when we are telling a story and see how each child reacted to the story as you did, we can come to know so much about how else can we support the child.
I say that stories should not be prescriptive, which
Mm.
is you tell a story, it's like a prescription, and you say that you do this, therefore you will be loved. You do that, and that makes you a good boy or a good girl. If my
True.
heart breaks every time such a story is being told, because you are highlighting one behavior without telling the child how to handle his or her own
Yes,
emotions
yes,
in that moment.
absolutely.
For example, a child who's broken something because of play, you break something, you're a bad child.
Mm.
But the fact that I broke it and I'm feeling sorry about it,
Yeah,
or I'm hurt because of that incident, I don't get space for that. That word or that phrase that I'm a bad child sort of stays with me because I'm being told. So for me, stories should, I teach this to all trade teachers and storytellers, is that allow a story to be, not make it prescriptive, but make it descriptive and illustrative.
yeah,
Make it reflective, make it participative, allow the child to be talkative while you are telling a
contribute to
story,
it.
contribute to say that yes, this is how I felt, and I felt
Yeah,
sorry, and I felt angry, I was hurt because somebody's saying no to me all the time. I can't take no, and no, David, is all about no. And it's such a great book to have with children, that how do you
beautiful.
respond to no, how do you feel, and what can we do about it, our emotions, and why we rebel against every time somebody says no to us. So I think wonderful possibility. The Storied Way Perspective is designed and developed by your Storybag Podcasting Network. Podcasting is a fantastic medium that brings listeners to gather around a story. As the podcasting industry grows by leaps and bounds, we at Your Storybag want to help storytellers, businesses, brands, and organizations leverage the power of narrative. We are not an agency. Instead, you can imagine us as a collective or a cohort that incubates and nurtures emerging story based podcasts in the airwaves. If you'd like to collaborate, commission, or create your own story based podcast, reach out to us at podcast@yourstorybag.com.
When you spoke about this, that let children interrupt, a lot of teachers always ask me that, when I start telling a story to 3-year-olds, they start interrupting. And I teach them something that, say you started telling the story of Red Riding Hood, and the minute you'll say Red Riding Hood was a little girl, they will say, I also have a red dress, mere paas bhi lal topi hai. They'll all start that. So give that little pause and then say, yeah, just like all of y'all, she also had a red cape. Now let's see what she did. So it's very important to include them and then lead them to the next part of the story. Instead of saying, no, you will not speak, only I will speak. And half the time of the teacher goes in telling them, tum chup raho, main story bol rahi hu. Because it's for them, it's just about finishing story time. And if you really cared about the children, then you would know that this is how a story evolves. A storytelling session is never about children quietly sitting and listening to a story. They will contribute, they will want to comment on it. So that's another important skill that needs to be taught to teachers
Absolutely.
as to how to navigate and include everything that children are saying as part of the storytelling experience.
So I did this with a group of teachers last summer. Over the summer, we did a workshop with about 60 teachers from early years in primary, and then said, "Ma'am, this is the most significant question. How do we handle a story which is constantly being interrupted? I can't finish the story." And it just happened that after the summer, they invited me to come tell stories to the same group. And I said, okay, now you will see, I will tell a story which is so open for them that they will be singing, dancing, getting up on their feet to 150 children. You will see how I will make them stand up and I'll make them sit down. And on a hot, humid day, we did that, and the teachers were like, "Oh, but we can't do this." I said, "Yeah, you don't have to do it with 150. You have to do it with only the 25 that you have in front of you. You can still manage. Use the techniques that I use." So
Yeah.
that's the fun, and they can't believe it that this is happening in front of them, and the story still finishes in the time, and we do it, two more stories in that time. It's very.
Very true, very true.
So let's talk about your book, the book that I read, and I had the lovely opportunity of getting it authored, signed by you, the book on Gijubhai and his methods. For again, a lot of people, storytelling, its importance in the early years is sort of understood, taken for granted.
Granted.
But here was an educator who sort of, championed it very passionately. And again, is that a very Indian storytelling movement kind of a thing? Because you also somebody who talk about the other philosophies from our Indian learning systems, which enable all round development for a child. Let's talk about that, your influences from Gijubhai to the other educators who have shaped you to sort of champion storytelling, particularly for young children.
So Gijubhai book is a very unique story in itself. My co-author, Vinita, she herself is a storyteller. She's an author. Because she was going to start writing children's books, she did a teacher training program with us at Podar on early childhood education. So she was my student. And during the course, I had taken a lecture on Gijubhai Badeka. And years later, she came and told me, ma'am, why don't we do a book together on Gijubhai? Because there is nothing available that helps teachers understand him further. So we said yes, and we laughed about it, and then we forgot about it until we met again years later. And this time we both was very serious, and we both said that let's do a book on it. So we said let's research to find out what other people have written about him. And we were shocked that the man who wrote more than 400 stories, books for parents and teachers, nobody had written a book on him. We were the first to do that. And that showed us the apathy in our country when it comes to educators and storytellers. I'm still fighting for this man to get his Padma Shri because he's not yet got his Padma Shri. And every time the Padma Shri awards are announced, and I hear names of people whom I feel have not contributed at all to society, I feel so sad that why couldn't Gijubhai Badeka be given a because his impact is huge. Let me just give you an example of what he used to do in his classroom. Why I am so enamored by him. He would tell a story and then he would pause and he would say, now I will continue this tomorrow. So people who know about brain development know that what he's actually doing is he's creating an opportunity for working memory to develop. So they will have to hold that information, remember it till tomorrow, because tomorrow he's not going to start the whole story. He will start from where he stopped. So which means you have that working memory, you have remembering what you did. He also used to do another thing. He would retell the story, but he would change things in the story just to know whether children are alert about it. So he played around with storytelling as a tool to develop what we now call executive thinking skills, cognitive flexibility, the ability to retain information, all this, which we now talk in big, big words. This man did it in 1920 when we were still under the British rule. And that's why I feel this man needs to be celebrated, not only because he was a storyteller, but because he knew the science behind storytelling, which not many of our storytellers today know. I saw you nodding vigorously when you heard his ideas because you are doing the same
Yes.
in your classrooms.
Yes.
But how many storytellers do we know who actually use stories as a tool? And that is why the national education policy thankfully mentions about him and is celebrating a story pedagogy.
Yes.
And that's what we've adopted in all our preschools. We begin the unit with a story. So we don't do what other schools do, like this month we'll do vegetables and next month we'll do birds. We do what is in the story. So we've taken a storybook, children hear the story, and then whatever aspects are there in that book, whether it's about birds or about eating habits or whatever, that becomes the unit of that month. So it's very important to take things to a child through stories. So you enter the story, and then through the story, you enter the world that that story took you into. So for me, Gijubhai is somebody, and if you read that book, I'm sure you must
I
have
have.
read it.
Yes.
Vinita has done a brilliant job on the art of storytelling and making the reader understand where language weaves into a story, etc. So that was our first book in that series. After that, of course, I did the book on Frederick Frobel,
Yes.
who's called the father of kindergarten, and that I did it with Nasreen Siddiqui. She's a journalist, and it is he who brought storytelling into schools. So, why is he called the father of kindergarten? There were no kindergartens before him. Children under the age of 7 were never educated or sent to any play space. It was he who did it. While he was there was another movement happening in Europe, which were called infant schools. And he hated that term. And that's why he came out with the term kindergarten. Because even now, I hate the word preschool. When you say preschool, means you are suggesting it is something before school. So, which means it's a preparation for school.
Absolutely.
So, it shouldn't be that. It's either call it an early childhood center or you call it a kindergarten. So, whether it's Vygotsky or whether it's Froebel, whether it's Montessori, they all believed in the power of stories in their own way. For example, Steiner, Rudolf Steiner, he was against stories, fairy tales especially, because the meaning was very clear that don't paint a picture in a child's mind of what is not there in the world. So that's
Fiction.
why,
Fiction is
yeah,
bad.
yeah, fiction of that level,
Yeah.
like a Cinderella and all this, is very bad. And he was against these fairy tales. He would also say something else. He would say the characters that you are using in the story, don't give them facial expressions. Let the child imagine the characters facial expressions the way the child wants it. So if you see dolls in a real Steiner school, the dolls are faceless. So they are not suggestive of what is pretty and what is nice and all that. So from each one of these, if you take what they felt about storytelling, and suddenly within you as a storyteller will evolve an aspect of storytelling that how much history it has and how beautifully it can be weaved into any philosophy of education.
Oh, yes. I agree with Steiner when he says don't tell fairy tales, because I don't agree
Yes,
with
I
fairy
hate
tales.
them.
They are not for the early years. They are for children in middle school, if at
Yeah.
all, because by then their moral judgments are firm.
Yes,
They have opinions. They can question. They can argue. They can talk about why this and why not that. But little children, they
absolutely.
don't. And therefore fairy tales sort of in a way tarnish the child's ability to think independently.
Very true.
um,
Very
and again,
true
that's
word you use, tarnish.
tarnish the whole idea of, again, what is pretty, what is not pretty, what is evil, and what is
Mm,
being kind. So I think that itself is a
very
quite
true. Very
a landmark, let's say objective, or let's say perspective of not using stories in the early years.
true.
You're also somebody who talks a lot about Panchakosh and Panchadi.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember our talk in Uti when at the conference last year. Again, these are very ancient Indian philosophies of, let's
Indian
say,
knowledge system.
absolutely, and not
Yeah.
the philosophies of, let's say, growing and learning and navigating in the world, and the levels of awareness that everyone. Again, very complex, but very simple. Complex when you put it in terms of the early years. So let's talk about very briefly about maybe Panchadi or Panchkosh. How does it align with what are these approaches, and how do they align with storytelling? Because everybody thinks the children are very naive, they are chotas, we have to tell them about what is this is a pen, this is a glass, this is a mountain, this is this. And then you sort of see how the child grows to a certain age, navigating his or her environment through the body, through consciousness. How does that work?
So basically, Panchakosh is about your five layers of your body. You have Annamaya Kosh, which is your outer physical layer, Pranamaya Kosh, which is your inner physical layer, Manomaya Kosh, which is your emotional development. You have Vijnanamaya Kosh, which means your cognitive development. And then you have Anandamaya Kosh. So I had, in the workshop that you had attended, I had linked Panchakosh with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That in both of them, if you see, actualization or self actualization comes right at the end. And it's the basic needs that need to be met first. Neuroscience says the same thing. If you don't feed the emotional brain and keep it quiet, your cognitive brain will not be able to work. And what is happening in our schools is we are so focused on the cognitive brain that we don't give any importance to the emotional brain. And so children misbehave, and then we are trying to punish them for that behavior, and then we are harming the emotional brain even more. So if you look at Panchakosh, all the areas, all the layers can be motivated or nurtured through a story, and a story already does that. It teaches you about so many things about your body, and at the end of a story, what do you feel? It is Anandamaya Kosh. So actually, if you see, a Panchakosh is what a story is. In through the story, you go through, you navigate all these layers in some form or the other. And at the end of the story, you will always reach Anandamaya Kosh. So I think that is a brilliant connection of storytelling to the Panchakosh. Where the Panchadi is concerned, Panchadi are actually called the steps of your lesson.
Lessons.
But if you notice, your story also has various parts. It starts with something. So if you see Panchadi, it has Aditi, Bodh, Prasar. Prasar, it ends at Prasar, Abhyas, okay? And we in India always feel that Abhyas means we have to study. But
Practice.
let's look at how, when you start telling a story, you do have an Aditi, which means you do start the introduction. You slip the listener into the story, and then comes the main part of the story. So that's your both, your conceptual understanding. Then the listener gets so involved in it, that's your abhyas. And if you end with prasar means the ability to talk about what you have learned, or the ability to tell others the information. So I think, isn't that what every storyteller wants?
Absolutely.
That at the end you should be able to go and tell the story to somebody else. So I think Panchakosh and Panchadi, if actually studied by teachers, they become the two tools which are going to help you navigate, whether it's literacy, numeracy, science, arts, culture, whatever it is, use these two tools and you'll be able to do a fantastic job in the classroom.
I'm, this is something, of course, I didn't know about Panchadi until I heard it from you, to be very honest. But I've been teaching teachers to use storytelling as a pedagogical tool for a very long time.
Okay.
And while I've been designing curriculum also for schools, my work was also that, if I've been given a theme or a topic and the entire month has to be done around it,
Hmm.
then therefore what are the many layers of understanding or experience can you create that it takes the learning one step ahead. So if the
Absolutely.
story about rain or monsoon, can there be different layers of stories where their experience level expands? So
Absolutely.
it's based on Panchadi,
Yeah.
where you come to a understanding that by the fifth fourth week you will have many stories about monsoons to tell, which will give you a whole rounded
Absolutely.
experience of what monsoon really is. And
Yes.
at the same time, while we designed, Deepta Vivekanand, my fellow storyteller, and I, you met her too, we designed the story pedagogy for CBSC. We sort of created the rubric of storytelling as assessment. That how you can enable the learner to come around and create a story which brings in the conceptual learning and the learning from the environment or from the stories that the child has understood, and come around and tell a story or write a story where you're not testing the language really, because that's not the, unless it's a language a class, but let's say a concept in science where the child is then therefore empowered to create a story where that concept is in action. So we created that. This was again, like I said, before I heard about Panchadi. And when you said that, it's a like not instant bulb in my head, which said, "Oh my God, we've been doing the right thing. Oh, but we've been saying this. I've been doing it for 10 years. But why haven't?" It's so difficult to get people to sort of accept this as
Yeah.
a methodology. Where that comes from. Let's come back. Okay, they're teachers and therefore the parents. I'm invited to many schools to work with parents on using stories as a parenting tool. And I walk in with a lot of humility, saying, "See, I am not a parenting expert. I'm not a child counselor. I'm just a storyteller who has had the privilege of walking into children's hearts, just
Hmm.
because through with a story and children have opened their hearts and their minds to me. I've experienced such beauty and magic there, and I want to share that. And I, of course, as a parent, I parent a nearly 14-year-old. I've only told stories to him, and stories is our vocabulary. So from whatever experience I have as a parent, I share that with you. You are working with parents on one side and teachers on the other side. How do we bridge this? How do we bring in, let's say, participation from teachers? Everybody understands stories are powerful, they're great, they're all of that. But the resistance, or that, what do we need to create more buy-in from teachers? What can we simplify for them so that they can just pick up and use and tell? Because not everybody has the skills or the heart to push it through. Right? Let's begin with teachers, then we'll come to the parents.
So teachers, they need to understand that they have two students in a classroom. It's the child and the parent. Till they don't accept the parent also as their student, they will not be able to create an impact in parenting, because it's not fair that we give a child to a parent without any training. I always tell teachers that you underwent a training qualification to become a teacher. A parent has no such qualification. So, whose job is it to support that parent? It's our job. You cannot blame the parent for whatever the parent is doing. The parent is doing it unknowingly. The parent may also be carrying forward the parenting style of their parent. So we need to make this parent understand, live their own parenting journey to understand what they can do for their child. So it's very, very important that as teachers, parenting is also supposed to be part of your toolbox. You cannot say that parents. I don't like some of these reels that are going around these days being made by teachers who talk badly about parents. I feel every parent is right in what they are doing, because it's their right. They've enrolled their child in a school because they think of you as an expert. So now, of course, they are going to look at you for the answers. And if you say to me that parent doesn't listen to me, that means you're not talking properly to the parent. Because if you tell a story to a parent, or if you talk as a mentor to a parent, no parent will not listen to you. So, where teachers are concerned, this is my brief to them, that it's your duty to also look after the parent, not only the child. And when it comes to parenting the parents, I'm very tough with parents. Yeah, I have this reputation of being extremely tough. I don't mollycoddle parents. In fact, I'm so tough that when BBC and Star Plus were remaking Super Nanny is a series in UK of this tough parenting expert who goes to parents' homes and teaches them how to, discipline their children and all that. So when Star Plus and BBC came together in India, I was cast as the super nanny. The series was called Masoom. A pilot was made, but it was never streamed. So why am I tough with parents? Because I feel you have to take your responsibility very seriously. That child did not ask to be brought into this world. You brought it. So now your duty to do the best for this child. And don't give me this nonsense of I don't have time or I don't have this. You have to make time. A lot of working moms come and tell me I am a working mom. I said, you are a mom first and working later. So, first the mom bit. Let's handle the mom bit first. Because I have a lot of stringent rules in my school. We have a snack menu, we don't allow all this. So, a lot of parents come to me and say, how do I make all these snacks? Because and then I just tell them the story of their child's health, that this is what's going to be. So then they understand it, but then but I still have to make it. So I'm quite tough when it comes to parents, because I feel you, as an expert, you cannot mollycoddle. They need to understand the whys behind the what so that they will know the how. That's very.
And I think somewhere parenting the parents is quite a tough thing. I think total hats off to you for being that.
A lot of people tell me be gentle with the parents. And I said, no, that gentleness is for you all to do. Okay. Me, I will say it the way it is. And parents also know that she's a tough taskmaster and she will say it the way it is. I don't mince my words. A lot of these parenting groups tell me that, ma'am, thoda gentle ho jao parents pe. I said, no, I'm sorry. You have to take parenting very, very seriously.
I'm with you on that. But yeah, I also have that empathetic, forward. I'm a parent myself. Yes, I totally understand that. It's okay. For very early on in my journey as a storyteller, working with parents, I learned not to judge parents. I said it's okay. I
No,
cannot
I
judge
don't judge
parents.
them.
Yeah, I
I
can't. I
judge.
understand. Yeah, and I can't make decisions on behalf of them. But I have to. I can say that yes, I understand decision making is tough. Let's talk about the problem first. Let's talk about how we feel, and then let's try and answer. Okay. Any advice for storytellers like me and my community of storytellers who sort of step in to work with children in the early years, work with schools, work with educators? What's your advice to them?
I think you guys are doing a wonderful job. And I feel every teacher or parent might be a storyteller, but your group of storytellers that we have in this country, I think y'all are keeping alive this wealth that we have of oral storytelling as a tradition. My only advice to all storytellers would be move away from the book. Learn oral storytelling, learn voice modulation, learn. If you'll see any of my storytelling, which I do online for children, I never use pictures. It's only me and my face and my voice, because we have lost that art of connecting to each other. And I always feel that there should be no medium in the middle when you are telling a story. I mean, I believe that as a storyteller, that you have a storybook which becomes your medium, and then the faces of the children are on the storybook and not on your face. I was a puppeteer, I am a puppeteer, but I don't use puppets also when telling a story. So there are different forms of storytelling,
Yes,
but please keep alive the oral storytelling tradition, because
always.
I'm a fan of bonding. And I
Yeah.
feel as humans, we are bonding less now. And that's why we are having all these issues of socio emotional development, mental health, etc. That would be my only advice.
So I'm somebody who teaches storytelling, like distraction free storytelling. Like we don't use props and puppets and musical aids, though I do bring in a lot of it in my storytelling, provided the story requires it. And when I teach, I don't teach them how to use any of it, and that's
Okay.
because I want to keep it distraction free. So thank you, Dr. Watts. I think this is a wonderful conversation. I know in the interest of time you have to be elsewhere. Thank you. This brings us to the end of a very deeply insightful
I love
conversation
you,
with you.
and I'm a huge fan of yours. I hope I've told you this. And I see your posts on Facebook and all.
LinkedIn.
Really admire the work that you are doing,
Oh,
really.
thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And as you continue to inspire, many of us who, sort of again telling us that we're doing the right thing, because you bring in the knowledge, and I think each one of us is sort of working towards creating a better world for our children, where we enjoy being an adult or in a child's world and bringing a child into an adult's world. I think both ways. So, to my listeners out there, Dr. Vats is on LinkedIn. She's very active on LinkedIn. Please follow her, and with a wealth of information about how to parent a child, how to be around a child, whether you have a child of your own or you have the privilege of working around children. I think you will get deep insights from her experience as an educator. And to those of you who've heard this episode, if whether you are a teacher or a parent or an educator in your life, have an educator in your life, please go ahead and share this episode so that it is passed on. Wisdom like this needs to be passed down. And just a small note, the Storied Way Perspective is going in for a short season break, and I want to thank you for listening and learning and leaning in towards these conversations on stories and storytelling. We'll be back very soon with more insights and more stories about how stories are shaping the world. Thank you so much, and happy storytelling. Hi, this is Rituparna. Thank you for listening to the Storied Way Perspective. This is a bi-monthly podcast where you will meet storytellers, influencers, entrepreneurs, coaches, thought leaders, and experts as I ask them, what can stories do in the world today? You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and everywhere else. Look out for the Storied Way Perspective with Rituparna. No matter where you listen to us, please rate, review, and share the podcast. This helps me know you are listening. You can also write to me at podcast@yourstorybag.com. I will wait to hear from you.